Hi, I'm finally live. Sorry if I'm looking a little disheveled. I came from a yoga class, but I wanted to make sure that since there wasn't a lot of questions, people had time to submit some more before I kind of jumped into this. So there's a few things that people had asked about that I'm going to go over both for the global exam and the AP exam. So I'm going to start with the global because this is content that will help out my AP students as well. And then I'll talk a little bit about the AP test. Some people were asking about like how to group documents quickly so that when they're working on their DBQ, that kind of works out. So really quick, someone had asked about the Hanseatic League. The Hanseatic League is this German like coalition or group of sailors. They kind of set standards, they help train each other. But that's not really going to be on the global exam. If you had some kind of enduring issues essay that would talk about like interconnectedness or something, you could always talk about the Hanseatic League as part of like a trade system, but that's more like global 9. Some of the other things that people are asking about are the French Revolution and some of the phases. So I'm going to jump into the French Revolution and just kind of do it in a nutshell. And then that will lead into Latin American revolutions as well. So the French Revolution, as you know, kind of starts out with this idea of meats. That's the problem. So you have a monarchy that's like corrupt, they're absolute power, and they're kind of taking advantage of that. The E is the Enlightenment. So you have the Enlightenment theories about natural rights and the rights of man and the real role of the government. And this leads to people now questioning whether or not their rulers, Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, should have absolute power. And then you have the A of meats is the American Revolution. It's one of the first successful revolutions. The Americans unite, they remove Great Britain from their control, and they form a democracy. And the French use this as inspiration. Of course, the T would be taxes. There's very high taxes. And of course, in the estate system, the first and second estate, those clergies and noblemen, don't pay any taxes. All the taxes are paid by the third estate, which are like the commoners. And a lot of them are very poor, but some of them are also like the bourgeoisie, right? Which is the middle class. So like lawyers, doctors, merchants, people who have money, but they have no real political power because the first and second estate always votes together to basically override what's going on with the third estate, so they can't really get any changes. And then the S, of course, is that social structure, which is the state system, which is unbalanced and unfair. And what we see is that the third estate not only has no real political power, they have limited protections, they pay all the taxes, and it's a real struggle for them. So this leads to the French Revolution. And in the first phase, it's this like moderate phase. The third estate forms a national assembly, and they vow with the tennis court oath that they will not disband until they have a new constitution that protects their rights and limits the monarchy. So they want to create a limited or a constitutional monarchy. They are successful in doing this. They also write the Declaration of Rights of Man to outline their rights so that they are protected, and all seems well. But this isn't enough for the radicals like Robespierre. And ultimately, they push and push and push until they're able to essentially remove the National Assembly from like the main force of this revolution. They arrest the king and queen on charges of treason, and they're executed. And of course, this ushers in that second phase, the radical phase in like the Reign of Terror. And Robespierre becomes the leader of that Committee for Public Safety. It's really ironic because they're supposed to be protecting the public, but pretty much anyone they feel is a threat to the revolution, a threat to this new republic that they establish after they execute the king and queen, are a threat, and they're executed via guillotine. And they execute many, many people. And those of you in my AP World class probably remember the DBQ we did, where you saw over time that the people start to question Robespierre. They start to question the Committee for Public Safety. Like, are these trials really honest? And then ultimately Robespierre loses power and he himself is executed. So like on the region, sometimes they'll compare Louis XVI and Robespierre because they both lose power and are executed during the French Revolution. That brings in the third phase, the Directory phase, where they have 5 men kind of ruling things, but they're really corrupt and inept. And ultimately, it doesn't work out. And then that ushers in the Napoleonic phase, where Napoleon Bonaparte rises up and through a military coup overthrows the Directory and basically makes himself the emperor. And then they begin to expand out. It is this expansion that unfortunately is going to lead to Napoleon's kind of downfall. I mean, he does help unite the French people. They were kind of disorganized and decentralized after all the Reign of Terror issues. And he creates the Napoleonic Code, which is a law code that applies to all citizens. He creates schools, etc. And these are some really good things, but he starts to kind of push out and he starts to conquer other parts of Europe. So he pushes into Spain and he tries to get into Portugal via Spain, and Spain refused. And this leads to that Peninsular War. And this leads to a conflict. He also is angry with Great Britain. So he comes up with this continental system where he was going to cut Britain out of trading with continental Europe. So like Britain's these islands to like the northwest. And then you have the continental Europe, which is like, today, Germany, France, Spain, etc. And so Napoleon's idea of this continental system was, if we make the continent of Europe self-sufficient, we cut out Great Britain, and that's going to hurt them. Britain has a very powerful navy, and really this kind of just hurts France economically. And then, of course, this is also during like the last like little ice age, and weather was pretty crazy, very cold, and Napoleon tries to invade Russia, and Russia's pretty cold to begin with. It's very large. And when he invades Russia, he keeps getting further and further away from his supplies. And the Russians practice the scorched earth policy, where they just burn everything in their path. And so as Napoleon gets deeper into Russia, further away from his supplies, there's nothing in Russia for him, and he returns with very few men, and that just devastates his military. And those are like his big mistakes. Ultimately, he's defeated. He's exiled. He comes back for like one hard last run. He's defeated at Waterloo, and ultimately exiled to Elba, where he dies. Kind of anticlimactic. So the big takeaway with Napoleon, though, is his Napoleonic Code still continued after him. And as he was out trying to conquer all of these regions, he creates a sense of nationalism. People of France start to look at themselves as like French people. The people of Spain are like, we're Spaniards, and we want a Spanish leader. And, this helps spread nationalism throughout Europe. But also, his wars, the Napoleonic Wars in Europe, cuts the European nations off from their colonies in the New World. So Spain and Portugal are like cut off from their colonies in like Central and Latin America. And of course, with this weakened state, this allows for people in these regions to start to question the rule of these monarchies over them. So like in Haiti, the Haitians start to question, well, should France be ruling us, right? And so you have this Haitian revolution that's like the only successful slave revolution where they're able to ultimately gain independence. But, this is what we see is it starts during the French Revolution. Toussaint Louverture is like the nationalist independent leader. He was trained in the military. He was educated like in France, and he comes back and he starts to kind of encourage the slaves to revolt through these Enlightenment ideas. And by 1791, they've started to revolt and ultimately gain independence in 1804. they really wanted to push for natural rights for everyone. The overture, unfortunately, was sent to prison in France, where he dies. And after a short-term monarchy in Haiti, in 1821, Haiti is declared a republic. And so it's like the second republic in the New World after the United States of America. So it's pretty successful. And of course, this is going to inspire other groups as well. So when Spain's cut off from their colonies in South America, you have the Enlightenment ideas, the success of the American Revolution, some successes of the French Revolution kind of spread into these areas, and places in Latin America also start to question Spanish rule. And a lot of this is because they've experienced a lot of hardships. There's slavery, there's a very strict social class system. So someone had asked about the encomienda system, which was this system that basically is kind of like feudalism. So you have this social structure, and they use that to identify certain groups of people as being lower class, and these are the people who are working the land. And so you have an elite class of people at the top who own all the land, and the people at the bottom kind of are working the land for them, including slaves. So at the top, you have like the Peninsulares. These are people who are born in Europe. They come to the New World. Then you have the Creoles, and these are people of European descent, but born in the New World. And then you have mulattoes and mestizos, which are mixed people. So mulattoes would be mixed with Europeans and Africans. Mestizos would be with the indigenous persons and Europeans. And then, of course, at the very bottom, you had indigenous people and then slaves from Africa. And this social structure was very rigid. And much like we saw in France with the estate system, people, unless they were the Peninsulares, had like no real political power. So Creoles, who could be very, very wealthy and have very like noble families, because of their mixed blood status, couldn't have certain jobs, especially in politics. They didn't have any real power. And so they really start to push these ideas of the Enlightenment so that they could gain independence from Spain. And we see that a number of people, such as Jose de San Martin and Simon Bolivar, are going to really push back and help organize people in South America to create armies and to overthrow the viceroys or like governors of South America. And what we see is that ultimately they're successful. Simon Bolivar like really pushes for like a fully united South America called Gran Colombia. But unfortunately, this is really difficult. You have like the Amazon rainforest, and then you have the Andes Mountains. It makes it really difficult to unite. And then you see like all these different groups kind of fighting amongst themselves until what we see are just separate nations in South America are formed. Unfortunately, for these new nations in South America, many of the problems that existed beforehand continued to exist. So instead of Peninsulares being in charge, now it's the Creoles. You still have slavery, you still have extreme poverty, you still have an elite group that owns all the land, but they're no longer controlled by Spain. And what we see is that Prince Pedro of Portugal kind of sees the writing on the wall, and in 1822, he gives Brazil their independence to avoid a revolution. We also see in Mexico a peasant revolt against Spain. Father Hidalgo leads it in 1810, then Father Morales in 1815. And then finally 1821, we see that there's a revolt with the help of the Creoles. They're ultimately, we see the peasants aren't really successful in Mexico by that point. Let me go back and make sure I didn't miss any questions. Haiti, radical phase, Napoleon. Okay, so we want, people were talking about imperialism. So so when you think about imperialism, imperialism we looked at in global examples with Great Britain. So with Great Britain, we looked at three key examples. So we looked at India, China, and then Great Britain's presence in Africa as well, particularly in South Africa. And so when we talk about imperialism, this is the result of industrialization. You have Great Britain and other nations industrialized. They not only need more resources, but they also need markets to sell their goods. And beyond that, you have these ideologies such as like the white man's burden or social Darwinism, where Europeans see themselves as superior to indigenous people in other nations, and they feel like it's their responsibility to civilize them and bring them Christianity and Western culture, etc. So they're kind of justifying what they do in these areas with this idea of, well, we need to civilize them at any cost. And of course, this leads to the exploitation of people and in their lands, and it becomes really problematic. So when we look at India, you know, it starts out with the British East India Company. So you have a company in India, and they're using the land to create cash crops so that they can profit off the people. There's extremely strict laws that are put into place. And then you have the Sepoy Rebellion, where they try to push back against them. And ultimately, what we see is that the British are able to really crush the Sepoys. And the Sepoys are these Indians in the British military, but they're able to really crush this revolt. And with that, the British East India Company loses their control over India, because the British crown, like the actual like queen and king, step in and take control of India, and it becomes an official colony of Great Britain, and they continue that exploitation of the people and the land for their profit. They do bring like Western medicine and education and transportation via railroads there. But, you know, part of the issues is that, you know, a lot of the home industry, such as making homemade cloth and artisan jewelry and things like that, are kind of killed out with this focus on cash crops such as opium or indigo or cotton. And they just can't really compete with the British. And then that continues under British control until after World War II. In Africa, we talk about the scramble for Africa. So I was kind of joking in class about, you know, if you've ever been to Chuck E. Cheese and you saw like Chuck E. Cheese comes out and they do the dance and they throw all the tickets, and all the kids scramble and try to like grab all the tickets, and they're like elbowing each other out of the way to try to get more tickets. And this is kind of like what the scramble of Africa was, except for, hey, my cat. Instead of kids, you have European nations meeting together in Berlin for the Berlin Conference, and they basically are scrambling to like grab these pieces of Africa that will be profitable for them. And so at the Berlin Conference, no Africans are there. It's just European nations like Belgium and Germany and France and Great Britain. And they're like, well, how do we want to carve up Africa? And they completely ignore tribal boundaries. So some tribes are divided. Other tribes that had been historically enemies were pushed together, which of course is going to create conflict. In the end, you have most of Africa carved up and divided amongst European nations for their profit. And then we see this particularly with Great Britain in what will become South Africa. They defeat the Zulu Nation. The Zulu Nation were these very proud warriors who had spears and shields, but they couldn't compete with industrialized military. So they have like Maxim guns, and they're just rapid fire. The Zulus are essentially destroyed, and the British are going to control South Africa for quite some time. And then even after independence, a lot of the colonial policies, such as like apartheid, will continue and limit the rights of people in South Africa. And then in China for imperialism, of course, Great Britain again. I mean, Great Britain's not the only nation. We just really kind of focus on them for these three case studies. With Great Britain in China, they wanted Chinese goods, but the Chinese weren't really interested in any goods from Great Britain. And so the British were really spending a lot of coin, like a lot of money in China, and they're trying to figure out a way to get Chinese goods without spending the money that they have. And so in India, poppies are grown and turned into opium. And so the British were able to take this opium, which is a highly addictive drug. You probably have heard about the opioid epidemic in America today. That is a derivative. Like heroin comes from this opium. They're related, and the British essentially get millions of Chinese people addicted to opium so that they could sell opium to the Chinese in exchange for the goods that they want. And when they do this, this leads to a couple of wars called the Opium Wars, in which the Chinese are trying to stop the sale of opium. Unfortunately, they are not successful. This ends with the Treaty of Nanking, which is an unequal treaty, and with that, China has to replace or pay for all the opium that was destroyed during these opium wars. They had to give Hong Kong, which was like a city, to Great Britain to control for a while, and they had to allow Britain to have access in China. And this leads to like spheres of influence. So like Great Britain will have a sphere that they control and influence in China, and then we'll see other nations as well. And of course, just like we saw with the Sepoy Rebellion, with pushing back against foreign rule, there are a couple of uprisings in China, like the Boxer Rebellion, to try to push the British out and other European nations out, but they're not successful. It's just very hard for them to compete with these modern industrial societies. And then, of course, Japan's like the flip side of that. When Commodore Matthew Perry from the United States shows up in Japan to try to get them to open their doors to trade, they recognize that the United States has far superior weapons and technology, and the samurai would not be able to withstand them. So they embrace modernization. They embrace industrialization. They rapidly industrialize. You have the government invest in money into factories and education, and they themselves become industrialized and then become imperialistic as well, especially in the Pacific, in like Korea and like parts of China. Let me see if there's anything else I kind of went off on. So to segue to AP World really quick about like group and documents, and then I'm going to kind of bring it back to looking at probably enduring issues that kind of help people out. I highly recommend that you check out Google Classroom, where I've posted all kinds of review stuff for you that can be really beneficial. So when it comes to DBQ and the documents, like keep in mind you need to use at least 6 of the documents on your AP World DBQ. My recommendation, if you can, to use all of them. One of the biggest issues I saw when I was grading your DBQs is a lot of you were not using point of view. For each group of documents, so you should have at least 3 groups, you need to address the point of view in at least one of those documents. So if you make it a point in each body paragraph, which should be a set of group, one of the groupings, you address point of view, you'll be able to get that point of view point. Now, it's not enough to say like, they thought this was good or they thought this was bad. You need to explain how that point of view relates to the argument you're making in that essay. So, in our Google Classroom under Skills Practice, I have PowerPoint that kind of walks you through the DBQ stuff and like reminds you of important elements of that. It's called DBQ Tips. There's also a section on point of view in the skills review. There's also a section on the SAQ in the skills review. So just remind you the AP exam is multiple choice, an SAQ, and a DBQ. Okay, so I would definitely check those out if you haven't yet. So I'm just kind of loading up the DBQ thing so I don't forget anything. So when it comes to groupings, I would think about your argument. Whatever the argument is that you're trying to prove, you have to think about how would these documents best support that. And that should help you kind of figure out. One of the big ways that people like to kind of do the grouping is they might do chronological, but if that doesn't work for the argument you're trying to make, I wouldn't do chronological. I saw people try and do chronological with our DBQ on the Reign of Terror, and it just didn't really fit what they were doing. Okay, so so again, chronological is the big one. So you have to think about the argument. The other big one that people like to do might be like political, economic, and social. So like, are these political topics, social topics, economic topics? Again, what's the argument? How does it fit? I'm just kind of going through the comments to see if there's any questions that you guys are posting in case you, where was Napoleon originally from? Corsica. Thank you, Nina. That's a French island near Italy. I'm so glad that there's people in here who can answer these questions. But if you have anything, I can try to go over really quick before we go. So political, economic, social, chronological are like the big ones that people like to go through for the DBQ. You could always look at like before, during, and after. So like that's like if you're doing like a change over time, or like you know, like a turning point or something like that. You could look at that as well. My computer is being super slow right now. I have to like close a few things because I'm trying to make sure. The other thing too is, you know, what I've noticed in class with the AP world is a lot of you guys get like really sucked into the documents and you spend a lot of time. You know, you really should only be spending like 10, 15 minutes tops on these documents. So you have to be quick. So you want to make sure that you're looking like, what's the main idea? What's the point of view? You know, things like that to try to get through rather quickly so you're not getting too hung up on them. Let's see. And so when you're like analyzing the documents, you should also think about like possible groups, like what's my argument? How would this best be supported? If I'm doing like causes and effects, you know, maybe you want to do political, economic, social. If you're talking about like a compare and contrast, you could do like, these are like maybe like similarities and then maybe like differences, and like talk about the different types of similarities and differences. You could do like motivations, developments, and impacts. So like if it was on imperialism, not that we haven't done that yet, but you could do like, what was the motivations for imperialism? What developed in these colonies? And then what's the impact on like the colonized nation or the nation that became imperialistic. So like on a topic we've done, say you had maybe like the Crusades, like what was the motivations for the Crusades, what developed during the Crusades, and then what were the impacts of the Crusades? And like that could be a way you could group them. You know, if you could group them by AP themes or even like enduring issues, if that's going to help you with your argument, but it really comes down with the argument that you're trying to do. Let me go back. Trying to double check all of these questions that you guys are given. So when it comes to like dynasties and empires, there's a lot. There are so many, and it's very difficult to kind of keep track. So my best recommendation, because I could be here all night doing that, is I would check out Friedmanpedia. I know a number of us who use it in class, but they have really good overviews of periodization. And what you can do is they have timelines. So you can go and look at the period and you can see what empires are ruling and when they are. And then underneath, they'll tell you kind of like their main developments. So that's something that you can kind of check out. You're not going to be able to remember everything about every empire in every like dynasty. So I would just kind of think of like a couple of key points. As far as like the Bantu in Africa, you should know that the Bantu will migrate out, and as they migrate, they like spread their language and their technology. And just remember, yeah, so for the DBQ, you should have at least 3 groups. You can have more, but you should have at least 3. So it's like basically a 5-paragraph essay. You know, you're gonna have your introduction, your 3 body paragraphs, each on a different grouping, and then a conclusion. I will post at the end. I would look at my Global 9 video Regents Review, because that will go over all the key like basic content. So it'll go over classical civilizations, it'll go over belief systems, it'll go over some of those like empires and dynasties as well. So that's really going to help you. So someone had asked about the 7 Years' War. We did like an LEQ on that. So the 7 Years' War is mostly a war between like the French and the British. It kind of rolls over into the New World as well with like the French and Indian War. And it's basically like the last big conflict in Europe before the French Revolution kind of bust out. Excuse me. And I mean, with when you think about the 7 Years' War and like the big events, and you think about like this is, you know, conflict, and it's not just in Europe, it's also in the New World, and it's all about like maintaining power and control. And you know, we see Europe rising up, you know. So we started out the year talking about Southernization, right? And we talked about how like India and China were really powerful and they had like large trade section networks. But then you see Europe kind of come into the sphere. And when they do that, this leads to competition. And ultimately, peace will come to the end of the 7 Years' War. And you're going to have a number of agreements between different European nations to basically kind of end these issues. You see some land broken up. You basically, though, see that Great Britain's going to be sucked into the American Revolution, and then that's going to be their focal point, and then the French Revolution will break out afterwards. But we do see, like, you know, a number of other European nations kind of come out with some big power. But when you talk about the 7 Years' War, I would just think about, you know, competition between European powers now to see who will be like the big man on campus here. You know, because there's a number of treaties that come out of this. And then let's see. Let me go back to these questions. I don't want to miss any. Yes, there should be, I think it's like 50 or 55 multiple choice. SAQ. When it comes to the SAQ, I would keep it simple, but thorough. So they have that idea of like acing the question. So you want to answer the question, you want to cite specific evidence, and you want to explain that evidence. That's the interpretation. So it's kind of like a CEI, but you don't need an introduction. You don't need like a thesis statement. Just answer the question, give us the evidence that you need to answer that question, and explain how that links back to the question. Make sure you answer all parts of that. I'm like just laughing at some of the chat that's going on. But yeah, SAQ, ACE it. Answer the question, cite specific evidence, explain that evidence, and you should be good. Okay. Other tips for the AP exam. I would try not to overthink the multiple choice. I've seen a lot of people overthink the multiple choice and they get it wrong. Go with your gut. Don't change your answers. Really think about what they're asking you, and of course, try not to like psych yourself out. Another question was like the 30 Years' War in 1618, 1648. And this really comes down to like a religious conflict of who is going to have power and control over like religion. So you have Protestants and Catholics essentially fighting over the Holy Roman Empire. Who's really going to have the main control there? For centuries, Roman Catholicism really had a hold over Europe. And then after the Protestant Reformation with Martin Luther, you have all these new forms of Christianity. And now not only are nations competing for power, but now you have religions competing for power. And this leads to a number of conflicts related to war. You even have different religious rulers who are different religions, trying to overthrow other ones. And it kind of comes back and forth over like, are we going to have like Catholicism be like the main religion here, or are we going to be Protestant? And I can post some links if you guys want to check out more. I mean, there's so much detail to that. But if you can remember that was, essentially Protestants versus Catholics, you should be able to kind of figure it out. And then, basically then we start to move on from like religious conflict to more political and social conflict after the Enlightenment. And we start to move away from religion as like the main focus. So let me see if there are other questions. So what do I do when the document for a multiple choice question is really long and I can't skim it fast enough? That's a great question. I'm lazy. I really like to read for pleasure, but I hate having to read for work. So work smart, not hard. When I'm approaching a giant chunk of text, I read the question. I read my options. I read the title of the document. I read the source of the document, and I see if I can figure out anything from that. Behind me? Yeah, that's my cat. Oh, it's a kitty cat. Oh, she's over here. That's Misha. She's chilling. So look at the document after you read the question, your options, see if you can eliminate any of the question options before you start to read, then start to read and skim. Look for like keywords from your choices for the answers in the actual document. And that can kind of help you narrow it down. A lot of times when I approach it that way, like I don't even read like a third of the document. Of course, if you still can't figure it out, read as much of the document as you need to figure it out. But again, like read the question, read your options, look at the title of the document, look at the source, see if you can eliminate any options, then start to look at the the document and see if there's any that kind of like match or kind of fit your options. Allergic to cats. I'm surprised you haven't had an issue because I'm always covered in cat hair in class. Other things that you can kind of keep in mind for like the documents. A lot of the documents that are really important, you've probably seen in class. So you like, if they look familiar, you probably like don't even have to like really dive super deep in them. You should be pacing yourself. All the multiple choice is like clustered. So you'll have like either like a map or a picture or a document, and then like 2 to 4 questions. So that should save you some time there. The biggest issue I've seen hasn't necessarily been with the multiple choice. It's really been with the process and the documents for the DBQ. Work smart with those. Make sure you're annotating as you go. Like, what's the point of view? What's the main idea? Things like that as you go. So it'll be easy to kind of reference them and then kind of group them. As you go, try to think about possible groupings. That's just going to speed things up even further for you. And again, point of view. So when you do your DBQ, each body paragraph basically should address point of view of at least one of the documents. So you need to think about like, what's the point of view of the author, and how does that tie into my argument? It's not enough to, if you're doing the Reign of Terror, to be like, this guy supported Robespierre and then he didn't. You need to explain why that supports your argument. So if you're arguing that the Reign of Terror wasn't an effective tool of the French Revolution, because ultimately they lose the support of the people and they lose the kind of the focus of the revolution, then you could say, this person initially had supported Robespierre, but as Robespierre became more radical, this person started to question Robespierre's methods for furthering the revolution and ultimately turns against him, thereby showing that the radical phase or the Reign of Terror and this use of violence was not effective in continuing the goals of the French Revolution. So you kind of see what I'm getting at there, hopefully. Bagel guillotine. I need one of those. Bagel guillotine. But it's got to be like a legit bagel guillotine. Like I want to be able to pull the lever and have it like drop down my bagel. I don't want to have to like push it down like those bagel slicers. Other tips or other questions. I am kind of looking at the chat, trying to kind of go through. If you get stuck between 2 multiple choice questions or answers, reread the question to make sure you didn't misunderstand it. Reread your options and like maybe put them into your own words. And then when that fails, go with your gut. And don't like second guess yourself. Middle Ages and what caused the Dark Ages to come after. Okay, so this is, I saw someone had talked about like feudalism and manorialism and all that good stuff. So if you remember in Global 9, you have the Roman Empire collapses. And when they collapse, the land under their control becomes completely decentralized. Like there's no governments really ruling them. It becomes really like unsafe. And so what we see is that these feudal societies are created to protect people and keep them safe in, in these little communities. And they can kind of band together to protect from like raiders outside. And of course, this brings in the Dark Ages because people are so focused on daily survival that they kind of revert back to being like illiterate. Like, people aren't learning. They're just farming and trying to survive and protect themselves from raiders and not be killed. so it's called the Dark Ages because it's, you know, there's just these little communities trying to survive. You know, there's not a lot of education. And of course, then we see as this progresses, ultimately we get into, you know, the Renaissance, and there's this like rebirth. And then you have education being spread once again, in the arts and music and so on and so forth. And you have like a rise of like kings and kingdoms, and then eventually like countries, you know, but it took a while after the fall of Rome to kind of get there. And so like one of the early ones you probably heard about was like Charlemagne in France, who like helped unite France and keep them safe and becomes like the king. Average score for last year, you know, I don't know, because last year I taught HOA. I didn't do AP World. I think it was a solid 65. I'm just kidding. I'm just seeing people who are like, don't say 70. No one got higher than an 85. Well, that's depressing. I don't know what the curve is. I can't tell you. That's something that I think once we see the outcome, we'll discuss. But I wouldn't freak out. I would do your best. And I would think of this as, you know, an opportunity to kind of see where we have to go with the rest of the class, right? Like we still have time for the actual AP exam. So, you know, see where you struggled, and then can we curve everything to 100? I wish. I don't think we can do that though. Open notes. No one would ever finish if we let it be open note. They would be there all day. So let me just double check to make sure no one submitted any more questions on the form, and then I'll go back to do some AP or some global stuff. I think some of those kids probably kind of like dropped out, but we'll see. If you have questions, keep putting them in the chat. I'm looking. Will you expose the test answer if we all chipped in $50? I don't think that would be enough, Maria, for me to lose my job. I'm sorry. But if you have other questions, I'll try to answer. I really recommend, if you're struggling with content, I would, and I can post this when I'm done, look at my Global 9 and Global 10 outlines. It's just all the basic content. I also have my Regents review video for Global 9 that you can review, that reviews all the basic content, and I can post those for you and you can have it. But I wouldn't stress trying to remember every little fact and detail. Like I'm like in my late 30s and I don't know every little detail. Oh, my cat's trying to escape. I'll be right back. And I'm back. Okay, so you're not going to remember every little detail. I don't remember every little detail. If you have an idea of like the big changes taking place in each period, then that will help you kind of think about what's going on during that time period. So again, Friedmanpedia, I think, is really good at like breaking down the periods with timelines and like the big changes going on. And it's really condensed, so it's easy to kind of review. My biggest tip though ever is self-care. You need to make sure that you go to bed at a decent hour. You need to make sure that you're getting a good night's sleep and you're eating something in the morning before you come in. You are better off doing that than trying to stay up all night studying. Because if you stay up all night studying, you're going to be too tired to perform on the test. And you're really not going to memorize anything. Okay. 2 a.m. No, you need to go to bed much earlier than that. I would honestly aim for like at least 7 hours of sleep and a good breakfast. That's going to go much further than trying to cram for this test. Trust me. As someone who was a procrastinator and would wait until the last minute to study for things, I know that it's far better to get a good night's sleep than to try to stay up late studying. So Freemanpedia is a good one. I'll post those other videos as well. Any other questions before I switch over to talking about enduring issues for global? 7 hours is a lot. Oh, 7 hours is like my goal. What if you wing this? Well, what's the worst that could happen? Right? You don't do that well, but it's a very valuable lesson. And then you can prep better for the AP exam. What are the answer? The answer is pie. Not like the mathematical pie, actual like food pie that you can eat. Questions, comments? Otherwise, I'm going to talk about some enduring issues, and then I can always come back. Definitely check out the resources that we posted online, though. We have so many resources in the Google Classrooms, and they're really beneficial. Is it better to do practice multiple choice or review context for multiple choice questions? That's a good question. It depends. I think if you are struggling with the multiple choice because you're struggling with like the types of questions, then do practice multiple choice. But if you're like, I don't even know this content, so I can even begin to answer this question, then I would look at content. In your review books, there's practice multiple choice at the end of each section. So like you could like review a section, do some multiple choice, and then kind of go back over that. If you've been reviewing for the past 2 weeks and you still fail, I think you should start coming in for extra help. We are sent in alphabetical order. Sorry, kid. I don't think anyone's going to get a 6%. Like you have to try really, really hard to get that low of a score. So I think you're going to be fine. Okay, so someone's asking me for late 19th century help. So like you're talking late 1800s. So are you talking like Industrial Revolution? Because we didn't do that yet. That's not going to be on the midterm. Or are you thinking something else? Are you thinking slip the answers? I don't have the answers. I wouldn't even make an answer key yet. The answer is C. I'm just kidding. You're absolutely correct. Cheating is not permitted. The Tokugawa. So, the Tokugawa, is kind of think about like feudalism. So they unite Japan under the Tokugawa shogunate, and they come up with, a social hierarchy that has the shogun at the top. The emperor is kind of just a figurehead, and you have, the daimyo and the samurai, and then you have like peasants and everything, and they are in control over Japan for a while, and they're practicing feudalism, and they had the code of like Bushido, which is kind of like chivalry in Europe. But they are going to come to an end once the United States shows up and forces them to open their doors. But they had like isolated themselves and really focused on like agriculture and their feudal society, pretty strict social hierarchy, etc. My computer is being so slow right now. It's like really annoying. Okay. Well, some of the topics are global, but I'm going to be going back. Unfortunately, my AP World kids did not submit many questions, but then totally hijacked the chat here. So I will be going back to talk about enduring issues towards the end. So I'm sorry to my global kids who are sitting here going, what's going on here? Drink some water. I'm dehydrated after yoga. Okay, so let me see. I'm going to see if I can put this into the group chat. So this is the Freemanpedia site that I was talking about. So if you have questions on like the 19th century and everything, you can check out this modern era. Error. Is that gonna edit and try again? It's not going to let me post the website. Oh no, it's not going to let me post the website. I can post it as a comment on this, I think. So it wouldn't let me post the website in a chat, but I did post it in this comment. So if you guys have questions about the topic, it's that Freemanpedia site. And like you'll be able to see he does an excellent job kind of going over everything that's taken place. And he has really nice timelines of what's going on. So you can kind of figure out what's happening. So, you know, you think about in this modern era, like industrial revolution has taken place. You can see that this moves into like revolutions, etc. So there's like the time grid that kind of shows you of kind of what's happening during this time period. And it also goes over like key concepts that you can review. There's videos posted, but all that is like really useful. Let's see. Other questions? I think my computer's freezing. Oh, I did mention the 7 Years' War and 30 Years' War earlier. So 7 Years' War is like between the French and British. It's basically competition over like power and land and control. And then the 30 Years' War is more religion, like Protestant versus Catholics. Scully, I did all your questions at the very beginning of the video, so you should be able to scroll back and see all those, but if not, I'll be posting this archived video. I'm only probably going to do this for like another 10 minutes. The encomienda system, again, I did at the very beginning. I talked about the French Revolution and how then we see this lead to Latin American revolutions and how the encomienda system was part of like those social issues that ultimately people are revolting against. So you can kind of check that out. When I post this video, I will post a bunch of resources that I had mentioned, such as my global notes and videos as well. Keep it going for just the chat. I don't know about that. I'm like, I still have to like eat dinner and go get my 7 hours of sleep. But I'm like, my computer's going so slow. Okay, so while I wait to see if there's any other questions, I'm going to talk about the enduring issues essay for global. So just a couple reminders when you're talking about the enduring issue. This is an issue. It's a challenge or a problem, something that's been debated or discussed over a long period of time. Okay. So some of the big ones that we've looked at would be like conflict, power, interconnectedness, inequity or inequality, ideas and beliefs, innovation, environmental impact, and scarcity. But those are just kind of like big umbrella ideas. One of the other ones is like human rights violations. So like you could talk about human rights violations, but specifically talk about like genocide as an issue where you have a group of people targeted and eliminated. If you were doing, say, like conflict, like you could talk about actual war, or you could talk about like conflict between like political ideas or religious ideas. You could have also done that as like beliefs and ideas. Under beliefs and ideas, you can be more specific and be like, you know, challenging westernization, or when you talk about innovation, like maybe like how people support innovation, or people like challenge innovation and try not to change. But those are just kind of general ideas and umbrellas. Like I wouldn't overthink it. I just like, what's the issue here? Like, what's the problem that's impacting a lot of people over a lot of time? And you make sure you read like the essay prompt. You basically have to identify and define the enduring issue. So this is the enduring issue. This is why it's an enduring issue. It's affected a lot of people over this long period of time. And then when you're writing the essay, you really need to go into like, how is this problem impacting a lot of people over time, or how have people impacted it? So like if you're talking about like conflict, you could talk about conflict leading to like death of people, of civilizations, but you could also talk about people affecting conflict by trying to organize like a peace movement, or like if you're talking about the French Revolution, you could talk about the National Assembly teaming up to challenge the king and their lack of power, or something like that. And then you need to explain how it changes or continues over time. So you can do this in a couple of ways. You can connect each of the documents to each other and shows how this one issue was an issue in France in the late 1700s. It was an issue in Haiti in like the early 1800s. It was an issue in Latin America in the mid 1800s. You know, you're showing those connections over time, or you can also connect it to today. So like if you're doing inequality in France, and I know JGC is going to love this, you know, you could talk about people in France during the French Revolution were protesting against taxes. And today in the 21st century, there are protests in France against Macron because of these high taxes that he's imposed. So you could do things like that as well. Will there be a lot of Global 9 on the test? So there'll be a mix of Global 9 and Global 10 stuff that we've done, or AP World stuff we've done this year. This is for AP World, not my Global Kids. Global Kids, it's just what we've done this year. You know, I would think about looking at like the big changes taking place. Think about like the impacts of religions and migrations, things like that. Can I share a PDF of the test? No, I cannot. Oh, thanks. Like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Let's see what else. So that's like my enduring issues in a nutshell. If you're worrying about periodization, I would check out, I linked in the comments on this video, I put that Freemanpedia. he does an excellent job with the periodization. So instead of me just like telling you, you can actually get a visual and it'll show you kind of where they are. And they'll show you like, this is the period. This is like all the groups during this period. And then like underneath, they'll be like, this is what's happening. And like, these are the big takeaways. And like, the guy will even be like, this is always on the AP exam. So it's a really good place to kind of go to just kind of recap what that's going to do. Simon Bolivar, he was the leader in Latin American revolutions, particularly in South America against Spain. He was an independence leader, and he was he really fought for that Grand Colombia. He wanted to unite South America, but it just wasn't possible with the whatchamacallit, Amazon rainforest and Andes Mountains. So geography kind of prevented them from uniting, kind of like in ancient Greece, you know, like very mountainous, very different. Other recommendations is like for my AP World kids, go back and look at the SAQs from class, look at the DBQ from class. Global kids, look at the CRQs we've done in class. You know, look at the Enduring Issues essay you got back as well. Like, my computer's being so slow. Huh. Told you. Any other questions? I know like in our AP World like review classroom, Miss Mack and Miss Milne posted a lot of really good resources, and they have like explainer changers. It's kind of like a summary of like all the big things happening in each of the periods. Mm-hmm. Okay. Again, with the SAQ, don't go outside the box. Just answer the question, give specific evidence, and explain how your evidence, links to the question. The DBQs, spend like 10, 15 minutes reading the documents and pre-writing. It goes really quick, and I don't want you to run out of time. As far as, again, Global 9 stuff for AP World, I would definitely look at like religion, especially like the impact of Christianity in like Europe and maybe even like Latin America. That's going to tie into imperialism, but we haven't gotten there yet. But like this motivation for like colonizing other peoples and bringing them Christianity will come into play. Think about the impacts of like migrations of people, why they migrate, what happens when they migrate. I would look at, when you're thinking about like empires and dynasties, just think about like what are the big kind of accomplishments, because again, you're not going to remember every little thing. Okay. So I would go to like Freemanpedia and look at their periodization timelines and just kind of get a blimp of what's going on there. Global 10, scientific revolution, enlightenment into the revolutions, and the industrial revolution and like imperialism. Again, just think about like what's the big ideas. Anna, no, you do not need to know about Latin American revolutions yet for AP World. We did not get them yet. We will get there after midterms. AP World is not as far as the Global 10 because Global 10 is only a 1-year course now. Like as far as like their tests, it's only on this year's content, whereas AP World is on everything from last year and this year. So that gets a little crazy. Okay, so I'm going to give you guys like 4 more minutes, and then I need to go. You guys need to go relax, freshen up, Get some sleep, get ready for tomorrow. Maybe review and like compare some like social hierarchies. So you could think about like the Tokugawa shogunate. You could talk about like feudalism, the caste system in India. You could talk about casta in Latin America and the encomienda system with like the peninsulares and everything. Like the casta was like, based on like ethnicity, and like they had all those paintings with like all the different groups of people and families. So you can like check all those out too. Okay. Last call for questions. So lost. Well, we've been kind of jumping around here and there. I've been answering questions. I've been giving tips. Again, I would just kind of look at the review packet. Your review book is really concise and helpful. I posted it in my AP World class, but I can post it in the review class as well. I have like a summary of all the basic content you should know for Global 9 and 10. But that could be helpful if like you're like, I really just don't know basic content. That could be helpful for this as well. How do you not fail? You will be fine. Work smart, read the questions carefully, think about what you've learned, think about like trends, and that will help you figure it out. Like even if you knew nothing about imperialism in Africa, what happens with imperialism in general. They exploit the people, they exploit the land, all for the benefit. You should be able to figure out like what happens with imperialism in other areas too. Yes, I can post the links in the review classroom for like the Freemanpedia timelines. What are you, Jon Snow? You know nothing? You're fine. You are fine. I have absolutely complete faith in you. I can post everything in the Google Classroom. I'll post this archived video, and I will also link all the videos I've mentioned, like my Global 9, Global 10, all that good stuff. So I can get all those in there. But again, don't stay up late. Go to bed. Who's Jon Snow? Psh. Game of Thrones? Hello. Man. Okay. Couple more minutes. While I'm waiting, I'm going to go post some things in the review classroom that can help you. And you guys let me know if there's any last questions. You're welcome. Is that John Green's friend? No. I don't want to post the code to the review classroom in this chat because everyone can see it, but perhaps one of your friends can share the code with you. We'll be putting things in there for the AP exam as well as we get closer to it. My computer's still slow, so I might not be able to post anything until after we're done. So the Trading Nanjing, that ends the Opium Wars. Remember, it's an unequal treaty because Great Britain kind of really comes out strong and China suffers. China has to pay for all the opium they destroyed. They have to give Hong Kong over to Great Britain for control, and it allows Great Britain to continue to sell opium and have that sphere of influence in China. Yeah, my computer is so slow right now. Okay, so last and final call. Any questions? Otherwise, I'm going to be posting this in Google Classroom. Uh-oh. I have a text message. Is this a student texting me? Oh, nope, it's Miss Milne. Miss Milne. Okay. Yeah, the periodization 5 starts to get into like industrialization, things like that, which we haven't done, but there's some of the like overlap with some of the like political stuff. But I would make sure that everything from last year, everything we've done up to this year, and including like the French Revolution, Latin American Revolution, Haitian Revolution. Think about like European state building. They're trying to build up their states. They're trying to maintain control and power. And this creates conflict between themselves and other states as well. So one of your friends, if they're in the Google Classroom, you can ask them to give you the code. Your teacher might have also posted it in your regular Google Classroom. Usually the classroom code is just under the title of the, so it says like APWH 2018-2019 review. Underneath that should have the classroom code. If you don't have it there, see if your teacher posts it in Google Classroom. Otherwise, you can shoot me an email and I can email it to you. But Miss DeFiore has posted some really nice like review stuff. Like there are some periodization maps that help you review some of the periods. Miss Mack has posted reviews for periodizations like 1 through 4 with the maps and like key terms and explainer changers. I mean, there's tons of stuff in this classroom to help you. Freemanpedia has like an overview that you can check out. And I'm going to post these videos as well. But like there's tons of stuff in there. But again, if you find yourself like it's just not making sense, you're probably just overtired. Go to bed. Don't go to bed late. Watching Riverdale. Go to bed. Watch it tomorrow afterwards. Okay. So I'm going to end this so that I can get the archived video posted. My computer's just too slow for me to post anything right now. It's eating up all my bandwidth. And I will post my summary notes. Definitely check out Freemanpedia. Great stuff, but there's also great stuff in that review classroom. Just have an idea of like, this is what's going on in this period. These are some major issues, and that's it. Oh, Jill wants a shout out. Hi, Jill. I saw your sister today. We had a nice little walk. Okay. So with that being said, I will see you guys in the morning. Breathe. You can do this. Yes, it's Merritt, like the Parkway. And you have everything you need. Hey, Scully. I already said Scully a couple of times. So yeah, good luck, guys. Don't stay up too late. Eat a good breakfast. Hydrate. Bring your pen and pencils. And I'll see you in the main gym. And you guys are very welcome. And we'll do this again before the AP exam and the Regents exam. Okay. I will see you guys all in the morning.